John chapter 21, verses 1 through 19. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them, and they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his other garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153, but even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me."
When I was a kid, living in central Kansas, and I remembered on Saturday afternoons when there was really nothing on but Wide World of Sports. This is before we were just inundated with programming on Saturdays. I would flip around and I'd finally get to this TV show.
Gone fishing. There's a sign upon his door. Gone fishing. He ain't working anymore.
That was a Sportsman's Friend with Harold Inslee. Anybody remember that? Yay! A few of you. It went national. It started off in Kansas City, Missouri on KCMO in 1953. Actually, it was a primetime live television show to start with. And they would just sit around and they'd talk about fishing, and he'd get these films, and he would go fishing all over the world, fishing and hunting, and then he would talk about that with various guests. And it was the beginning of the fishing show. In fact, it was probably one of the two shows that invented the entire fishing or hunting show, because there's only one thing that a fisherman wants to do when he can't go fishing, that's watch someone go fishing. I never was a fisherman myself. In fact, I never got into it. My dad was not a fisherman. For him, it was a matter of finding the pole, finding the reel, finding the tackle box, finding what's supposed to be in the tackle box, get it all loaded in the car, go out to some bank someplace and then sit there with the bugs, the mosquitoes and the gnats swarming around and bothering all the time. And that was the good part. Then you had to, if you actually caught something, you had to gut it and scale it and fillet it and cook it and then clean up the mess. My dad didn't care for fishing, and I never learned much either. We had a friend, though. We had friends. Biney and Vicky Beinecke loved to fish. And so we would go with them, like to Canopolis Lake, and they would get out the things. And for them, it was a religion. It's a time of meditation. A chance to sit there and watch a bobber bob and think of nothing else. Or to sit there and go through the motion of casting and reeling it in. And nothing else on your mind, and you're free. You don't have anything you have to do because you've gone fishing, and you're done with everything else for that day. Barney would get mad at us kids. You're just making too much noise. You're disturbing the peace. Well, I don't think the fish cared, but it was Biney. He loved his time, and Vicky too. In fact, when Biney passed away, they cremated his body, and then when Vicky left us, they put her ashes and Biney's together in a tackle box and buried that. They were fisher persons. And if you're how many are do lots of fishing, love to fish? All right. That's great. And I guess that's about right. About a third or so, maybe a third of the people that I've done stories for have been deeply into fishing. And it's a great way to get away from it all, even for a very short time. Now, Peter, when he said, I'm going fishing, it wasn't just about going out and meditating with a rod and reel. It was his work, and he hadn't done it for 3 years. He had been with Jesus and, had lost the touch maybe, or just hadn't done it. And so when everything had gone wrong, from the time that he had denied him, not just once, that would be just happenstance, not twice, that would be coincidence, but 3 times he had told people, I don't know him. And that had to have weighed heavily on his heart. It must have pulled him down so that when Jesus showed up there in Jerusalem, he saw everyone else being excited, but he was like the uncle at the family reunion that sort of stands back because there's something going on that doesn't let him get into it all. And it must have been a long, long 60-mile walk from Jerusalem back up to Lake Galilee, back to his home in Capernaum. Just devastated by it all. And finally, he just says, I'm going fishing. I don't know what else to do. I'm going to go do what I know how to do. And his friends, Thomas and Andrew and the Zebedee boys, they come along. So they have a full crew out there on the boat. This was not casting, this was pulling nets. You sailed the boat around as you laid out the net, and when you reached back to the center and made a circle, then you started to pull it in. And that was a matter of pulling those muscles. I'm sure they ached that night I should say, as they pulled and pulled and pulled and nothing was there. And so they lay them out again. And they pull and nothing was there. And they laid them out again all night long, caught nothing. You can just hear their muscles screaming. I hadn't done this for 3 years. As the sun came up, they were heading back facing the shore. They saw some stranger out there and he says, how you doing? Catching any? And they said, nah. He says, try the other side of the boat. Now, what good is that going to do? Because, well, you always did it on the port side, on the starboard side, the right side of the boat, or left. I'm confused. Anyway, on the one side, because that's how you pulled. You had your place and you pulled. Now you had to stand over here and pull with the other muscles. And so, but they did anyway. They had a lousy night. Who knows? Sometimes things work when you're fishing. They made the circle. They started pulling from the other side of the boat. And lo and behold, the nets were so heavy it almost capsized the boat. And just then, John turned and saw the guy by the shore. And he said, it's Jesus! And Peter just grabbed his cloak and wrapped it around his middle, and he jumped out and swam in as the others pulled the boat and the net all up to shore. It was Jesus. He was sitting there with a fire going and some fish already on it, and he said, bring some more of that fish. Let's have a breakfast together. The place is called Mensa Christi because there's this table of limestone, a limestone outcropping on which they ate. That's the tradition. And so it is called Table of Christ. And there's a church over it. There's a church over every rock in Israel, over this limestone ledge called Mensa Christi. And this is where, in the Catholic tradition, this is where Jesus reinstated Peter as the leader of the church. They ate together, nobody said much, and then finally Jesus took Peter, or Peter took Jesus a ways away, and they had a moment together. This is a statue at that place in the Holy Land at Mensa Christi. And this is where Jesus is saying, do you love me? He said it 3 times. Not just coincidence, happenstance, not just coincidence, but for real. Do you love me? And each time, Peter answered, you know I do. You know it. What else can I say? Of course I love you. And each time Jesus replied, feed my sheep. Tend my lambs, or tend my sheep, feed my sheep. There's a lot going on here, especially, I think, for those who have lost their faith. Something happens. Something happens. Somebody says something, or the preacher says something, that's the worst. Or maybe the person themselves thinks something, or get with those who are like down on religion, and so they join that noise, and they say, I don't know anything about it. And they break the connection. Or the connection is broken by the church. And they're lost, and Jesus is dead. And they're so deeply lost that even when they have the moments, the little epiphanies that say, you know, there's more to this than just this material world, they are like the uncle standing at the back of the family reunion, not ready to jump in. What it takes, though, is a return, a full return to what was going on before. Maybe it is meditation with a rod and reel. Maybe it is straining the same old muscles, doing what works. And then to have Jesus come and say, why don't you do it the other way? That's the big story here. Jesus' appearance, wonderful, fantastic. Jesus eating with them there at that shoreline, marvelous, miraculous. But the important thing, at least from what I'm seeing, is that they were asked to do it the other way. And sometimes we let the way we always do things get in the way of Christ. We do it some other way. And yeah, it's uncomfortable. I know we've never done it that way before. We've always done it this way. We feel comfortable doing it that way, but Jesus comes to get us the fish. It's not about doing it from one side of the boat or the other. It's about whether or not you gather the fish. And that's true with all of us. And once we realize it's Jesus, then we cannot wait to get to him, because he has shown us that the other side of the boat is the answer. The other way of doing things is the answer. His way is the answer. And then he talks with us. Do you love me? Well, of course. We sing the songs. Oh, how I love Jesus. And Jesus loves me, this I know. Do you love me? Do you love Jesus? I saw a little sign the other day, probably on Facebook. It said, love is not a word, it's an action. Love is not a noun, it's a verb. Love is what you do and how you do it. And Jesus says it's very simple. Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Feed my sheep. Y'all are the sheep. But there's a whole world out there that are the sheep of Christ as well. They don't even know it yet. And we are called, if we love Christ, to do unto the least of these. And I want to tell you, this church does. I'm looking at everybody here is doing a sheep feeding thing. And that is wonderful. We've got some opportunities for some other ideas, some other ways of feeding sheep, which is what the church is. We come together on Sunday to practice fishing from the wrong side of the boat. But then we go out and we use those newly strengthened muscles to feed Christ's sheep. Some time ago, somebody did a numerology thing with the number 153. We went, why that number? Of all the things that came down in that story, 153. Well, they did some math stuff with it, some numerology stuff with it, and it came out to be the letter iota, I. The letter I, which is the first letter of Jesus' name. The J is an I. 153 means the complete number of Christ in their midst. And that's what the marvelous catch of fish is all about. It's not about fish. It's not even about doing good. It's about bringing Christ into this world and being alive with Christ and for Christ.